Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. At least 7 people are killed and dozens more injured after a gunman opened fire at a Chicago area 4th of July parade. It happened in Highland Park, Illinois, about 30 minutes north of Chicago, just after 10 o'clock Monday morning. Investigators say nearly 40 people, ranging in age from 8 years old to 85 years old, were treated for gunshot wounds at a nearby hospital. Among those who were killed, a former preschool teacher and a grandfather. After an hours-long manhunt, officials took 22-year-old Robert Cremo III into custody. He was arrested after being named a person of interest in the case, but has not yet been charged. Investigators believe he opened fire on the parade from a nearby rooftop. Later investigation shows he likely used a high-powered rifle to carry out the shooting, though officials believe he obtained the weapon legally. At a press conference on Monday, Illinois Governor J.B. Fitzer addressed the families of the victims and called for stricter gun control laws.
The families of 6 individuals woke up today to join a community celebration of our nation's independence. They will go to bed tonight less than whole. There are no words for the kind of evil that shows up at a public celebration of freedom, hides on a roof, and shoots innocent people with an assault rifle. There are no words I can offer to lessen the pain of those families who will no longer associate the 4th of July with celebration, but instead with grief. It is devastating that a celebration of America was ripped apart by our uniquely American plague. A day dedicated to freedom has put into stark relief the one freedom we as a nation refuse to uphold, the freedom of our fellow citizens to live without the daily fear of gun violence.
Joining us today is co-host Terry Austin and Florida State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg. Dave, charges haven't been filed yet, but as the Palm Beach State Attorney, what charges do you see here?
Brian, good to be with you. There'll be multiple charges of first-degree murder. That's the most serious crime. There's evidence of premeditation here. But the problem is, in Illinois, they have a moratorium on the death penalty. So the most that this guy could get would be multiple life sentences. And in Florida, if that happened, then he would certainly be eligible for the death penalty. But in Illinois, it looks like that's the charge, and that's what he's going to be facing.
Yeah, like you said, multiple. So while there is no death penalty, I think a moratorium since 2011, they can go back to back to back and run those consecutive rather than concurrent. Terry, police are already pointing to the person of interest, social media, and supposed rap career. Were there red flags that weren't caught and maybe a lesson to stop future shootings here?
You know, there were multiple red flags on social media, and that poses really a unique set of challenges because just from the sheer volume of postings on social media, the fact is the local, state, and federal authorities have to investigate all of that. And clearly, his posts were cringing. He basically talked about multiple mass shootings. He was a rapper, and his songs and his lyrics talked about that. And I do think that it should be used against him if ultimately he is tried and it gets into evidence. But I think it's really hard to decipher social media and to figure out whether or not it's a real threat. Hopefully, the authority will be able to do better in the future with those types of postings.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I heard that local law enforcement were there on the ground, on the streets, but they're not patrolling the rooftops because why do that? It's crazy how these different methods are being employed for these mass shootings. Well, at a separate 4th of July celebration, 2 police officers were shot and injured when a gunman opened fire in Philadelphia. It happened just before 10 o'clock Monday night during a firework display on the Ben Franklin Parkway. Investigators are still searching for the suspect, whose gunshots struck 2 police officers, one in the head and the other in the shoulder. As gunshots rang out, the crowd of the 4th of July celebrators began running down the street. Both officers were treated at a nearby hospital and have since been released. Right now, the shooting is still under investigation. Prospective jurors are filling out questionnaires now for the trial of George Wagner IV in Ohio's Pike County massacre. Wagner is accused of helping his parents and brother plan and carry out the murders of 8 members of the Rodian and Gilley families in April of 2016. The 8 were found shot to death in their homes in 4 locations. Most were shot as they slept. George's brother, Jake, has already pled guilty to the murders and will spend the rest of his life in prison and has agreed to testify against his family members. Their mother, Angela, also pled guilty and has agreed to testify as well. Billy Wagner's trial could start later this year. George Wagner says he's not guilty because he didn't actually pull the trigger in the crimes. But prosecutors say George Wagner was involved in the crimes every step of the way. The case is considered one of Ohio's largest criminal investigations. Jury selection will begin August 8th. Law and Crime will be there to bring you continuing coverage of the trial. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, closing arguments are presented in the trial of DeJuan Ferguson. But first, does Amber Heard still face perjury charges overseas? Why the FBI is now involved in the investigation. Welcome back. Amber Heard's been under investigation for allegations of perjury in Australia for more than 18 months. Law and Crime's Angela Levy is here with how the U.S. law enforcement is helping the Australians.
Yeah, Brian, the FBI is assisting the Australian government with this investigation and has been for quite some time. Some internet journalists have actually been talking about this, and now we've learned it is indeed true. And they are assisting with an investigation into allegations about whether or not Amber Heard perjured herself.
Where are things at with pistol and booze Star Wars?
That was Australian Senator Glenn Stirl at a hearing in October 2021, asking for an update on an investigation of Amber Heard.
Why is it taking so long? That's all I want to know. In fact, do I need to have a Senate inquiry on it?
The saga dates back to July 2015, when Heard was charged with illegally importing her dogs, Pistol and Boo, into the country in violation of Australia's biosecurity laws. The dogs she shared with Johnny Depp were smuggled into the country without the proper documents and without being declared and quarantined in violation of those laws. The following year, Heard pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of falsifying travel documents and recorded a video with Depp by her side.
Australia is a wonderful island with a treasure trove of unique plants, animals, and people.
It has to be protected.
The perjury investigation started in 2020 after statements made by Johnny Depp's former estate manager, Kevin Murphy, at Depp's libel trial against The Sun in the UK. Murphy testified that Heard pressured him to give a false statement to Australian authorities about how the dogs entered the country, and that he had warned her the dogs didn't have the proper paperwork to enter Australia.
How can it take 12 months? We know the evidence that was there. In they came, the celebrities thought that they're above Australia's biosecurity laws, and we know Barnaby Joyce, or Minister Joyce, had his little meltdown, and good on him. Okay, whatever. No, this is cut and dried. What's taking so long?
Well, Senator, it's only cut and dried if we can get a conviction, and we can only get a conviction if we work with our partners at the AFP.
And that's where the FBI comes in. The FBI has offices in Australia, of course, and around the world. So when allies ask for assistance in criminal investigations, they gladly assist. There's no word yet on when this investigation could be complete. We've been told many times that it is ongoing and there will be no further comment. And Amber Heard's team did not respond to my request for a comment. I sent them an email over the weekend. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Dave, perjury and probably hearsay were the favorite legal terms during the Depp and Heard trial. Do these Australian perjury charges seem like they have merit to them?
Yes, it seems like she did lie, but then is the juice worth the squeeze? I mean, this is a 7-year-old case. This is not exactly capital murder. And although you don't want to treat a celebrity any better than anyone else, you also don't want to treat them any worse than anyone else. You have to wonder, would the Australian government be going after another person if her name was Amber Smith? Would they go after her, or is it just because she's a famous celebrity who just lost a defamation case in the United States? I think it's the latter. So maybe they just want to move along to the next matter.
Yeah, we'll see how this plays out. I tend to agree with the Amber Smith analogy. Now, Terry, can the FBI's participation in perjury charges in Australia have repercussions for Heard in the United States?
Well, I don't think the FBI's participation is going to have any repercussions. And I also don't think that the case in Australia will have any repercussions. It's all about whether or not she accurately filed the paperwork as far as bringing those dogs into the country, the biosecurity. The issues here for perjury, as far as Amber is concerned, really relate to that defamation. And if anything, Brian, we could very well see the UK going back after Amber Heard, because in the Virginia defamation case, she actually said about the $7 million divorce settlement something very different than what she said in the UK. She said in the UK she paid all of that. She couldn't really say that in Virginia. So we might see something else happening to her back in the UK that could bring those charges up against her. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of potential fines, pledges, or donations up for Amber Heard. Now, Anjanette, Heard's legal team also filed some documents in the Fairfax defamation case before the holiday weekend. What were those?
They filed a post-trial motion, Brian, asking the judge to set aside the verdict or order a new trial. They believe that the judgment was excessive. They believe that she did not commit or was not liable for defamation because they said they believed that she was actually abused. They also brought up an issue with a juror and said that basically this juror they believed was born in one year, but he was born in another, and they want the court to investigate.
All right, we'll see how those play out. Thank you, everyone, for contributing. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the trial for WNBA star Brittany Griner begins in Russia. Plus, a verdict is handed down for DeJuan Ferguson. Will a Missouri jury find the man guilty of his son's murder? Welcome back. A verdict is decided just hours after closing arguments were presented in the case of DeJuan Ferguson, a Missouri man now convicted of killing his 9-year-old son Christian in the early 2000s. Christian, who had a rare disorder which prevented his body from processing protein properly, was just 9 years old when he went missing. The boy needed constant medical attention as his disorder interfered with his ability to walk and talk. Prosecutors say Ferguson failed to provide his son with proper medication for more than 2 years. The day Christian disappeared, June 11, 2003, Ferguson left his home with his son and stopped to use a payphone. Moments later, he called 911 to report someone had carjacked his running SUV with Christian inside. The vehicle was found hours later, just a few miles away, and Christian's body was never found. After just 2.5 hours of deliberation, jurors found Ferguson guilty of first-degree murder and child abuse, resulting in death. Just before the verdict was handed down, prosecutors presented their closing argument, saying Ferguson deliberately killed Christian.
In this case, we had years of deliberation. Every time he didn't give him his medication, every time he didn't bother to feed him, he knew what he was doing. He didn't do it. That is a deliberate choice he made because Christian was an inconvenience he didn't want to be bothered with. And then that night, going into his room, that was a deliberate choice. Picking him up from his bed and taking him into the other room, that was a deliberate choice. And whatever struggle occurred in there, whatever he did to little Christian, that was absolutely a deliberate choice. And then he took him from the residence, did something with the body, and then planned a cover-up.
Ferguson's defense attorney argued Ferguson had no reason to kill Christian.
If it's possible Christian's alive, it's not guilty. If it's possible that Christian was kidnapped, it's not guilty. If it's possible that Christian died of his disease, it's not guilty. State has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that DeJuan caused the death of Christian. Anything less than that is not guilty. DeJuan has no motive to kill his son. None. There's no life insurance policy, no financial windfall. The state's grasping at straws for a motive, and what they're trying to say isn't supported by any evidence, and it just doesn't make sense.
Ferguson's conviction carries a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. Terry, we know the verdict. So what do you think the jury hung their hat on in reaching their decision?
You know, I listened to that prosecution's closing, and it was in line with the evidence of the case. They hung their hat on the fact that the father had nothing to do with the son. He really just ignored him. He didn't give the medication. And the motive, contrary to what the defense is saying, is, I just don't care. I don't want to be bothered. That's a motive. You don't have to have a financial motive. And I think here it was very clear that the father just ignored Christian, 9 years old. He was relying on him to take care of him. At the end of the day, the jury came to the right decision, and they said, you are responsible with this kind of motive.
Yeah. Now, Dave, Ferguson's sentence is mandatory, but we can guess there will likely be an appeal. Were there any issues that stuck out that you think the defense can win if they made an appeal?
No. And as a prosecutor, I think that they're going to be grasping at straws to try to overturn this verdict. It looked like the only question amongst the jurors was whether it was first-degree or second-degree murder. The defense may try to say, well, the prosecution didn't meet the weight of the evidence, the burden of proof here, where you have to show beyond a reasonable doubt that he is the one who killed his son, as opposed to, well, it could have been, lack of nutrition or a million other factors. But in the end, I thought that the evidence was pretty compelling. He was a bad dad, didn't care about his son, and he is the reason why his son died.
All right. Well, like all cases, there's going to be an appeal. We'll be interested to see how this plays out, whether it's final or there's an overturn. Of course, Law and Crime Network will be there to cover both situations. When we come back, an American faces trial on the other side of the world. WNBA star Brittany Griner writes a plea to the White House in hopes of getting help to come home. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. In international news, the trial of United States WNBA player Brittany Griner begins as she calls on President Biden for help while detained overseas. Back in February, Griner was arrested and detained in Russia after cannabis oil was allegedly discovered in her luggage at the airport. The United States has since said Griner is wrongfully being detained. Griner, known mostly for her career as an American basketball player for the Phoenix Mercury, also plays for a Russian basketball team in the offseason. Last Friday, Griner's Russian trial began. A judge there ordered Griner remain in the country until it's over, which could last until December. On Monday, Griner penned a handwritten letter to President Biden, urging him not to forget her. The letter reads in part, quote, "I'm terrified. I might be here forever." In reference to the 4th of July holiday, Griner wrote, quote, "It hurts thinking about how I usually celebrate this day, because freedom means something completely different to me this year." If convicted, Griner could face up to 10 years behind bars in Russia. Dave, Griner's charges have been questionable. Along with her detention, is there any reason to believe that this trial will be legitimate?
No, just like the war in Ukraine is not legitimate. She's being used as a political pawn by Vladimir Putin. They have an authoritarian state, and they're very anti-LGBT. So the judge is going to make the decision in this case, and I can imagine the judge is probably not the most progressive of sorts. And their system is different than ours. Ours is an adversarial system. Both sides give their evidence and give their case. Here it's an inquisitorial system where the state acts as the investigator, creates a case file, and that's the basis for the verdict. I don't expect justice in this case.
Yeah, if anything, I'm expecting hopefully the president steps in and maybe a trade is made, but what that trade may be, I'm not quite sure. Terry, your reaction to Griner's letter, do you think it will move the administration to do more in returning her?
I do think Biden is taking this letter very seriously, and it's not the only letter he's gotten. He's gotten letters from LGBTQ groups and women's groups and groups all across the country. She's pleading for her life, and she's hoping that Biden takes her as a priority. You know, it's really sad. You mentioned, Brian, that she was there playing in the Russian Premier League, and she's doing that in the offseason to make extra money. So she really is part of that community in a sense. She's been there, several years doing this, and it's really a shame that she's been stopped for this sort of what we would say is a minor violation. She faces, if she's convicted, up to 10 years in a penal colony. And, they could slap on additional charges and they could even keep her longer. And I think she's very worried, and she's worried for real reasons. So I am hoping that Biden looks at this and does something to help her out.
Yeah, maybe this is the end of American players playing in Russia. That could be a next step as well. Well, thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.